Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Visibility Factor podcast. This is Sue Barber, your host. I am so excited today to have Jenn Donahue on the show with me. She is a friend from the book group, and you know that everybody we bring on from the book group is amazing and has such amazing books. And she has an incredible career that I cannot wait for her to share with you. And her new book called Becoming the Warrior is coming out maybe towards the end of this year or beginning of next year. But I wanted to give you this interview to have a sneak peek and you get to see more about her and learn more about her book. So welcome to the show, Jenn. I'd love to have you introduce yourself to the audience.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I've been following this and I'm just honored to be a part. So a little bit about me. I am an engineer. I'm like an engineer's engineer. I've been engineering and building since I was about 6 years old. I had more fun actually building Barbie's dream house than actually playing with the Barbies. I took that. I got my degree in engineering, and right after I went to the United States Navy. Now, the United States Navy has a core group, and they do construction for the Marine Corps, other allied forces. So right after I graduated from college, I joined the United States Navy, and I was with the Navy for 27 years, both active and reserve, stationed all over the world, got to meet new people, got to experience some really interesting cultures. I went to Iraq, went to Afghanistan. Now I own an engineering company and I'm a full-time speaker because I like to think about all of those lessons that I learned, not just for professionally for leadership and helping people create teams, but also all those internal struggles that I had to deal with and overcome. I want to help people with that as well. So that kind of sums me up in a nutshell.
And a great recap of life. And I know there's a lot of deep things inside each of one of those that you talk about in the book, and you have such great stories. I love how your humor comes through, Jenn. I mean, I don't know you tremendously well, but I can just feel like I got to know you and your personality through the book and your stories. And we learn about her family, and we learn about her, all the different teams that she's worked with and the companies and stuff. But I just think that is one of the gifts that you're giving to people, is sharing you with them through the book. So I can't wait for everybody else to read it. I was lucky enough to be a pre-reader, and I really loved it. So tell me a little bit about your experience, because I think there's a lot of people who are leaders, coaches, entrepreneurs on the show who listen. And there's always this thing about working in maybe more male-dominated fields and how that experience can be for a woman. And I would imagine in the Navy specifically, right, you got to a captain. And so how did that experience work for you to move to a really high-ranking position in the Navy and be in tough situations like being in Iraq and other places?
For what I did, I was pretty much only 9% women the entire time. So a lot of times I'd be the only woman in the office, might be the only woman officer in the battalion. But whenever I was growing up, I grew up on a street where there was all boys. And I had so much fun with them. We'd climb trees, hop over fences, do all the normal things that I thought was pretty normal. And so I grew up around guys. Whenever I was going through elementary school, high school, I always started gravitated and I was always hanging out kind of with the guys. So whenever I went and got an engineering degree, again, what I did as an ocean engineer, there was only 2 women in my class. So again, I'm hanging out with guys all the time. Whenever I went to the United States Navy, there's only 9% women. So I'm kind of hanging out with guys the entire time. I think that helped me a lot as I started to go through, because I kind of got how they joked. It's sort of one of those things where girls seem to joke differently than guys. And I felt very comfortable pretty much most of the time. Whenever I got to my very first battalion, I was at the point, this was in the mid-90s, where they had finally let women into the battalions. I was only the 3rd female officer in that battalion. Like, they had never had women in the battalions. And so it was a real shock to the system for many of them to understand, like, what do we do with them? And I found that there were some women that had not had the type of background that I had. And so they were kind of, they liked to paint their nails. They like to do all the things that I just didn't really get or understand. And they got picked on. And one of the things that you need to understand also about me is that I had this mama bear type of complex. And so I found that I was having to stand up for some of these other women that were getting picked on. We have to do a lot of times is we have to stand up for others that might not be able to stand up for themselves.
Mm.
And I kind of got this reputation that I was like, don't mess with her, because, she's standing up for other people, and people started to respect that a whole lot more. I went to Alaska, which was actually my favorite duty station, and we were doing drilling and blasting, like in the wintertime. It
Wow.
would snow so much. I mean, we were getting like feet of snow like every day, but it was so much fun to go out there. And again, I'm the only woman, I'm the only officer, and I have my whole group around me. And we had so much fun. And it was really there that I started to hone a lot of my leadership skills, because I was really in charge for the first time in my life. And I had this great mentor. He was a senior enlisted, and he helped me understand who I was. I didn't have to be, one of those yellers. There's so many people who are yellers, at that time that were bosses of mine. And I thought that's what I had to be. Turns out I didn't. And I could be myself, and I love listening to people. I love creating teams. I like pulling ideas from other people and exploring what that can be, because a lot of times they know more than I do. And that's where I really honed my leadership skills, is on this tiny little island in Alaska. And I used that as I went forward, as I started to go up in the ranks, because a lot of people saw me as something different. I wasn't yelling at people, I wasn't demanding things. I was pulling them in and creating teams, and we were doing amazing things. And that's what I used all the way through my career till I was able to retire as a Commodore. Like, I was in charge of 1,800 people deployed all over the world, but it still used those same leadership traits that I did back then, of taking care of people, listening to people, drawing in their ideas. So that's really how it all came to be.
That's amazing. And I love that you stood out, right, from what they were probably used to and had experienced. And I think it makes you much more relatable and allows them to see that there is another way to do it, and what you traditionally might think, to them, for them to see an example of something different, right? And I just love that so much. I love that you guys got to go play in the snow. I'm sure that that was interesting and cold at the
Yes.
same time, but it's about having fun too at times. And I don't think people would think about that, in those situations. So I'm curious, what made you decide to write this book? Who is it for, and what are you hoping they'll take away from it?
So this book is written for people who have a lot on their plate. They have a lot of responsibilities, but they have this idea, this goal, this dream that they want to go after. But with everything that's going on in their lives, they feel like if they put themselves out in the world, they wonder, are they going to be enough? And what I found is that a lot of times we stop ourselves because we start to listen to all those mean little voices in the back of our head. In the book, I have two characters. One of them is the mean little voice, and the other one's the sneaky little bastard. Sneaky little bastard is basically the one who's like, instead of doing this, maybe let's go create spreadsheets. That's more fun. It's one of those things that like kind of takes us off the path of what we know we're supposed to be doing. And so whenever I wrote this book, I'm a keynote speaker, and I feel like I'm just hitting the peak, just that really top of the iceberg. And I wanted to give something more to people. I wanted to give them all these different tools. Like, I've got spreadsheets in there. I've got charts. I've got all these things that I would love to give people. And I honestly believe I was put on this earth to help people. And this is my way of doing that. I've been thinking about this book for the last couple of years and thinking, how can I help more people in the world?
Well, it's definitely going to do that. There's so many cool things, great stories as well. And I want to talk about a few of them, but just some cool things like, can we talk about the warrior framework in the book? I think it's really amazing. And I love an acronym. So anytime you can create an acronym and use it, I think it helps. But maybe you could walk through that for everybody, just to give them a sneak peek under the tent of what that framework looks like.
The warrior framework is all about perceiving those little voices in the back of our head, assessing if they're going to help us or not, then readying our warrior, and then acting on that. And actually, this all comes from the military.
Mm.
When we were out in Iraq, Afghanistan, or wherever it was, we had a rules of engagement. And if you're on post, if you're looking out for bad guys, this sequence that we have and is just drilled into us over and over again, we perceive, what is going on in front of us. We call it situational awareness. Next, we assess and we think about, okay, is this a friend or is it a foe? We had to make that decision pretty quickly. And then we ready ourselves. If the foe keeps coming at us, do we have to take care of our weapons? There are things that we can do to basically try to get them to halt and go away. If they still keep coming, and then we have to act. And sometimes that's shooting flares, to try to get them to scare away. And then sometimes more than that, if needs be. But the warrior framework is all about those mean little voices in our head. And so I think of our stream of consciousness. We have all these thoughts that are going on. We have conversations with ourselves. Am I hungry? Do I need to go to the bathroom? We have instincts and intuition and all these other things that are going on. But we also have these little voices, these mean little voices that are trying to tear us down or trying to steer us off track. And so we need to think about our stream of consciousness and perceive what's going on within it. In that assess stage, we really are trying to pull out, okay, is this the mean little voice? Is this a sneaky little bastard? And what do we do about that? Then we have to be ready. And what I like to think about is that, we all have a warrior inside of us. That warrior is your counterpoint to those mean little voices and those sneaky little bastards. So if you have these malevolent voices, realize that there's another voice that you have, and you can strengthen that voice. And that's the voice that says, I can do it. So I talk about we have to arm our warrior. And we do this by really understanding our accomplishments. We do some great things every day, but a lot of times we just try to shy away from it because maybe we're humble or we just don't want to recognize them. We strengthen that warrior by basically going through and understanding what are our internal strengths. Are we witty? Are we giving? Are we empathetic? We have to internalize those strengths. And then every warrior needs a weapon. So I call this my why. What is your why? Why are you doing it? What is that solid purpose for what you're doing? So think about when those little mean voices come at you, you basically can whip out your weapon, which is your why, and you can basically slay them right there because your why is more important than whatever they have to say. So that's the warrior framework. And then you just have to act. Take that first step. Don't be afraid. It's like you're not surrounded by landmines. Just take a step. Even if it's maybe in the wrong direction, get moving so that you can go forward and do all the great things that you know that you can.
Yeah, I love it. It's very simple. And what's really cool is some of the, it seems like very simple exercises, but so powerful and impactful. Like she gives a great post-it note exercise. You have this other great exercise, which is the what you've done and creating a word cloud with that. And I thought that was so clever. I love a good word cloud, first of all, but I just think it's a really neat way to see the accomplishments that you have. Because I think sometimes, to your point earlier about we kind of hide those things sometimes, the things that we're good at, we don't always talk about them. And even though they come easy to us, we almost dismiss them and devalue them instead of celebrating them. And I think that's where some of these things in your framework help to bring those things back to life and show them to people again. I would love, if you are up for it, to share, one of the very first stories in the book. You talk about a very, I guess I would say, a life and death decision that you had to make. I'd love for you to just give the highlight of that, because I know there's a lot more to it. There's a lot of details that I don't want you to give away, but I think it's a good story that helps people understand, what some of the things are that you went through.
Absolutely. In 2014, there was an assassination attempt on my life. This is while I was in Afghanistan. I was the commanding officer of the battalion, and our job was to train the Afghans how to be engineers. Well, what happened was that there were some insurgents that had infiltrated the unit that we were at, and they were planning to kidnap me, do horrible things to me, and then kill me. Now, whenever I found out about this, my brain was like just smashed automatically with shock, disbelief, anger, rage, and fear. And all these voices just started going off. I mean, it was like, 4 alarm fire going on in my head. I was thinking about, oh my God, like I might be dead. And then all of a sudden the mean little voice starts coming in and telling me, hey, you might not be a good enough leader to take these people out there. And then the sneaky little bastard came in and said, hey, maybe today would be a great day to go do some paperwork in the office. And there was just so much going on. It was like a whole cacophony of, I was thinking about, what another person would have done in my situation. And I started comparing myself to other people. There were so many voices going on in my head. And I had a mantra for most of my life. And that was, don't let these little voices beat you. My mom gave it to me, but there was so much going on that like I couldn't separate it out. And I just didn't have time to come up with the right answer, immediately. And I had to take a really deep breath and start to think about going back through that warrior framework again and starting to think about and pulling apart all those different voices, which ones were true, which ones were false. I mean, there was one that was basically shouting at me that I wasn't a good leader. I mean, how silly is that? I just found out I might have been killed, and all of a sudden my head is trying to tell me that I'm not a good leader. I mean, those two just don't even make sense.
Yeah.
And I had to stop, take a deep breath, and start thinking through and piecing apart all those different voices to try to find what was true. And what I had to think about was that, I've been in a lot of crazy situations like this, some of them semi life and death, but this one seriously was. And I also knew that the Navy had given me all this training kind of over and over about how to stop and think about the information that we have in front of us. What do we know? What do we don't know? And how do we make a decision? And it took me like several seconds to kind of go through and piece all, tear all these things apart to try to get to what was the truth. And I could only do that really by going through the framework and basically pulling apart and understanding like, hey, you know what? I have really made hard decisions before. And I know that I'm not going to put my people at harm for some type of glory or anything like that. And so going through that, and then I just had to act and took a deep breath and said, okay, we're coming out. So that was basically it in a nutshell.
And the way you talk about it sounds very obviously fact-based, because I just think about all the emotions that all of us who are hearing that would have been feeling in that moment. And knowing that your whole group is standing there probably waiting for you, obviously, to make a decision and not wanting to interfere and probably give you too much guidance in that moment because it's your decision to make. But that's a lot of pressure, Jen. I can't even imagine. That's a ton of pressure. And knowing that because I know there was a previous incident that had happened, 3 weeks before that, which did not end up in a good way. So, you have all of this information, maybe too much in some ways, that it made it even harder for you.
It really was. There was a major general that was killed 3 weeks prior. And there had been almost like 165 people wounded or killed like in the last several months since we were there, when there were, people infiltrating different units, stealing uniforms, kidnapping, killing people. We had several colleagues that were killed during ambushes. There was a lot going on.
Like, thank you for your service, first of all, being someone who's willing to put their life on the line for our country and to go to places that, may not exactly want us there all the time. And there's people who do, and there's people who don't. And I think, you had to navigate some really tough places, and decisions like that are just an example of someone who's willing to do the right thing, for her country and for her team standing by her, waiting for her to make a decision. And then just knowing that, you've been trained. And I think that comes through in the book really well, how much training you've had. And, everybody's trained to, repeat, 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 so that in the moment you don't have to think about it. You just do it.
Right.
And I think that's an important part.
Thank you. And also thank you for your support. Like that really means a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to talk about a couple other things. There's a couple stories that I think are really fun to talk about, and I think have a lot of applicability to the audience. One is Jackie's story, where she grew up in a tough place, had a lot of challenges growing up, and I would just love for you to share kind of a little bit about that and how she navigated to get out of those situations that she was in, but also how she had to be strong enough not to get pulled back in. I will say.
So Jackie is one of my best friends. I met her here in Bend, Oregon, which is where I live now. And I knew that she had had some type of history. She had told me that she didn't have a very good growing up period in her life. And whenever I was going through the book and looking for different stories, I just asked her to tell me hers. She grew up in a very abusive family. Her parents drank, they were alcoholics, they were abusive, they were violent. She wound up in foster care several times. But then she finally met somebody at school and got invited over to their house, and that family was divorced. But she said they felt very normal. It when she went there, she felt safe. And what was more important is that they actually saw something in Jackie. Jackie loved to read, and she didn't really get a lot of that in her foster care whenever she was back with her family. And so they would take her to the library, and they would help basically feed this desire that Jackie had. And it was really beautiful. And she realized, wait a minute, families can be separated, but they can still be normal and they can still be loving. Jackie finally moved out of her house as soon as she could at the age of 18. She went and stayed with a friend. She didn't graduate high school, but she also, with all of this reading that she had done, she wanted to go out and she wanted to see the world. And she did. She got her GED, and then she finally became a flight attendant. But one of the interesting things about this was her family's reaction to all of this. The family's reaction was, Jackie, how dare you leave this family? Which is really interesting. It's like they were putting her trying to grow, and they were trying to hold her back. And it's like what I call the naysayers. She had this dream. She wanted to get out. She wanted to improve her life, but they kept just trying to want to tear her down and bring them back to their level. She's gone on. She has 2 beautiful kids, a wonderful husband, and she still gets flack from her family from time to time because she's not back there basically living in the trailer park with them. What's interesting also about this is that they're trying to make it all about themselves instead of trying to celebrate her.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that a lot of naysayers do. Like if you want to go after a goal, if you want to go after a dream, a lot of times those naysayers, they'll make it about themselves, and it'll make them look at probably their dark, terrible lives and realize, wait, you're growing. And so they'll try to pull you right back down with them, because then that makes them look at themselves, and they might not be happy with where they are. But if they can drag you back down, that's going to make them happy at the same time trying to make you miserable.
Yeah. Yeah. I hate that she had to go through some of that, but I think it probably made her stronger because of it. And I think that's very common. And the reason I wanted to share that, have you share that story, is I think that happens to a lot of people whenever you go through any kind of change, anything that's some type of growth or taking something that someone else doesn't expect you to do. Whenever I coach someone, I'll say, you're going to change, and you need to start recognizing that people might not like that. And they might have a lot of things to say. I love the naysayer term. They're going to have a lot of things to say, and you have to be strong enough to recognize that you don't have to return back there. You get to keep going in the direction that you want to go because this is your choice.
Right.
And I think it's really hard. It can cause a lot of people to self-sabotage and go back to what is comfortable, because this might be harder, right? To change is not easy. So I love Jackie's story, and I'm so glad you put that in there. I think it makes it so easy for people to understand that these things can happen. And for me, it happened to me, and it was unexpected. I wasn't expecting that to happen. When I left craft, everybody had an opinion about, you should go, get another corporate job. And when I said I was starting my own business, it's like, what, why would you do that? That seems too risky. And it helped me understand that that was their risk, averseness, not my situation. And I could make a different choice. but it was so surprising to me. I was expecting them to be cheerleaders for me, and they were not. So I think it can happen to everybody at some point in your life, and it's good to know.
It's really true. And one of the great things I just want to add about Jackie is she feels like she's finally broken that circle of violence,
Mhm.
and alcoholism. She has two wonderful boys that she was able to bring up. And I
That's
think
amazing.
she now feels like, hey, you know what? I've done it. I've made it. And I have these two wonderful human beings that haven't had to worry about violence and everything else. So I know that she's in a better place, even though her family still tries to tug her back in from time to time.
Yeah.
She knows she's in a better place. She says, you got to trust your gut. Your gut will
Mhm.
never steer you wrong.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. And you also brought up another story about Michael and his experience with reading. And, he had some challenges with ADHD and some other things that he was working through. But what I loved about that is his mom's support. His mom supported him through all of that challenge where he wasn't like every other kid. And he found reading to be his escape. And I love just different parts of that story. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to share about it, but I think it was just a really cool story about how you can be a little bit different and you can still be amazing because we're all different, right? We're all unique. And I think we have to celebrate that as well.
I think the best part of that story was about the bookmobile.
Yes. Which a lot of people may not know what that is. Of course, I knew what that was, but yeah. So tell them what a bookmobile is in case they are younger and haven't had that experience before.
In very rural parts of the United States, he was near a farm. They had a bookmobile because they didn't have a library anywhere close to them. And it was basically a bus. It just had a bunch of books in it. But there was a limit for how many books you could check out at a time before the bookmobile could come around again. But Michael was such a voracious reader that he would get through the books in only a couple days. So his mom had to basically have a special relationship with the bookmobile driver to get additional books just for him so that he would have enough books until the bookmobile came around again. And I just thought that was so funny that, she basically had to almost bribe the guy to allow him to have more books than other kids.
Yeah. And the other part that I thought was interesting, where you talk about the chatter book and how that really helps to look at the chatter. Because I think everybody has this little voice, that you talk about in the book a lot, but everybody has that is trying to be critical, is trying to keep them down. And if you listen to that voice, it can keep you small. And I think that was really a great part of this story is how he started to really look at that voice for himself and how he dealt with it.
It was really interesting because he brought up something that I had never heard of. And it's basically a different type of self talk. So instead of saying to himself, why am I upset about this? He would say, why is Michael upset about this? And it was a way to distance himself from his feelings so that he could really look at
Mhm.
that. But he's been journaling for years. And that's really helped him sort through a lot of the different voices that are going on in his head. Sometimes he does it in a book. Sometimes he uses different types of software for his phone or whatever it might be. But just by journaling, that's how he's really been able to get a lot of these voices out of his head and basically on paper. And he almost feels like they're trapped on paper now. And so they're not in his head.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's good to keep them there, especially if they're not helpful.
Exactly.
Ah, that's good. So, is there anything else you want to have people walk away from this conversation about the book and get them excited about it for when it comes out?
I would love for people to know and understand that they might have some type of ginormous goal. Maybe they've had a goal in the past. Maybe it's just a small goal, but they feel like, you know what, I just don't know if I can, or you're making up excuses like, I just don't have enough time. That's one of the biggest ones that I found for people. Realize that, you know what, you have the ability to do this. And this book is going to try to help you. Like, man, I throw so many different tools at you. It's like, I want to make sure that you succeed because you have that in you. You have this spark. You have this dream. Go for it. and I will give you every tool that I can to make sure that you're able to get to it. We are all capable of such wonderful things.
Yes, I can attest the tools are amazing. She gives you a lot of them, but they're very simple and there's no reason you can't do them. So you just have to be intentional and take the time to do them. And there's so many that I used throughout while I was reading the book, but I just went back this morning and was looking through some of them and had forgotten about them. So I need to go back in and write some of them down so I have them nearby. But I think it's helpful to keep them in front of you, right? That's why I think the post-it note is a really cool, putting your why on a post-it note helps you be able to see it all the time so that you don't forget and you just stay focused on it.
I urge you, get a sticky. I know I have one around here somewhere. Just get a sticky, write your goal on it, put it on your desk. That way you see it, you visualize it, it's there. It'll keep you
Go for
motivated.
this. And I think that's the part we get distracted with other things and sometimes we lose sight of that. So I love that. So Jenn, how can people reach out to you if they want to connect with you?
One of the best way is you can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm Jenn Donahue with 2 N's. You can find me there. You can go to my website, which is also Jenn with 2 N's, Donahue, DONAHUE.com. Those are probably the 2 easiest ways.
Excellent. And I know that she'll have a lot of stuff about her book on her website and all over LinkedIn as it gets closer. And I will make sure that we talk about it as well on the show. So we're going to transition into what I call the Rise Up and Be Visible quick tips. And these are 4 questions that I ask every guest who's on the show. So the first one is, what do you think visibility is and why?
Visibility is really important. I'd like to say that you can either be visible or you can be camouflaged. And especially with the military, it was really easy to just try to blend in. Maybe that's your attitude. Maybe that's just your persona. A lot of people don't want to stand out, so they camouflage themselves with everybody else. I think it's important to be visible. It's not about trying to go for the next rank or trying to be braggadocious. Being visible is about being able to show who you really are. It's not about trying to be somebody else. Maybe that means sticking up for other people. That's what it's all
Yeah,
about.
love that. What are you doing to be visible?
I am getting outside of my comfort zone. Believe it or not, I am shy and I'm an introvert. I even with 27 years in the military, I'm still a shy introvert. And going out and talking to people and getting on podcasts, being more visible even on LinkedIn and other social media platforms, going out and volunteering, being part of different organizations. I have a story to tell. That's what I'm trying to do. So those are some of the things that I'm doing, which is again outside of my comfort zone, but that's where I'm at today.
Yes, I totally have been there and I feel that way many days. So I understand. What is either career or leadership advice that you've received that was the best for you?
The best career advice that I've ever had is just be yourself. Whenever I wasn't, it was uncomfortable. I was sleepless at night. I mean, it didn't matter how much I was getting paid. I was so miserable. There were times that I would come home and my husband would literally have a glass of wine outside and say, "Drink this before you come in the house." Because I was so upset and I was so angry. But whenever I would learn that, you know what, I need to just be myself at work, whether it was in the military or whenever I got out and I was a civilian, you know what, everything seemed to click into place. So I will tell anybody, be yourself. Everybody else is taken. Just be yourself.
Yeah, great advice. And what is a book you would recommend to the audience?
I love the visibility factor.
Well, thanks.
I've had a chance to also be one of your advanced readers for the workbook, and
Yes.
I just find it absolutely fascinating. It is very, very impactful.
Thank you. Yeah, we're getting there on the workbook, everybody. It's coming together. So you'll hear more and more about that as we get closer. But yeah, we finally picked a cover. And yes, I'm excited for that to come out. It'll be kind of the next level for people to take advantage for visibility for sure. So thank you for that. I appreciate you being a part of it. Okay. Anything else you want to share before we go?
No, I've had such a lovely time, and this has been
Yeah.
such a wonderful conversation.
Yeah. I love that you are doing this great book, and I love everything that you've done. And you definitely need to get your message out in the world because people need it. They definitely need it right now more than ever. So
Thank you.
thanks so much for being here and being a part of this.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining today on the Visibility Factor podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one.